Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Benchmark Studio Podcasting. I'm Darren, your host, and today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Stacey Irwin, who is a professor at Millersville University, has a lot of really cool things going on, and I'm very excited for our conversation. Stacey, thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here.
So you are, like I said, a professor at Millersville. Did you always want to be a professor?
No, not really. I think that was just one of the things that came about when I was doing my media work.
Okay.
I was doing different media work in different places, and I got my master's degree. I think my goal was always maybe to own a radio station. I was on the radio track. I'd worked at a couple of radio stations. And then I ended up in a position of a staff member at Towson University in their visual media lab. And I started teaching students how to use digital editing when it was first started from, the analog where you put the tapes and the decks, and we moved to digital computerized editing. And I was teaching students how to do this, and I thought how much I really enjoyed teaching them. Not that I didn't like the management of facilities aspect, but I really found that the teaching editing was a really cool thing. And so I went back to I went to University of Maryland to get my PhD in education, so I could learn how best to teach technology, like video editing and different kinds of technology, the pedagogical side of building a curriculum. So my master's and bachelor's were in like radio, television, film, mass media, and then I switched to education after I'd been exposed to some educational experiences.
Right. Wow. So you grew up wanting to be in the industry,
I did.
More or less. Okay.
I did.
All right. Tell me about that. How did you did you grow up in Maryland?
No, I grew up in Lancaster. I went to Manheim Township, and I did some writing for the newspaper, and I did theater work for them. And I always wanted to be in communications. I toured local TV and radio stations. I did all the Girl Scout badges that had to do with media. I read all the biographies of Barbara Walters and just the different different people in the industry, and just found an affinity for it. But during my undergraduate internship was when the space shuttle exploded on all the different screens, and it was very traumatic and difficult. I think there was 14 screens, and I was like, am I going to be able to work in news? This is really hard. So I finished my internship, and then I got a radio internship, and that went really well. And then they hired me for some part-time work, and I started writing news and voicing news for them. And that kind of led down the path of working in radio, which, I mean, today it's all similar, right? This is like radio, but it's a podcast. So that's kind of how I got my start. And I think a lot of people meander a little bit. So I'm still doing all the things I love to do, but I'm doing it as an educator. And I really appreciate that side of things, of figuring out what is a good hour and 15-minute class and what is a good assignment, and how to potentially grade somebody when they're just trying to learn. What's a skill that's bare roots, you've got to know this to move on, and what's a skill that is just going to help you look like you know what you're doing. There's the basic benchmarks, and then there's the things to so that when you get in front of an employer, you go for an interview, you have some stories that you can tell about your experiences of being in media, radio, television, producing, writing, podcasting, all those kinds of things.
Gotcha. Okay. What kind of classes are your favorite to teach?
I really like the production classes. I consider myself a production professor. Getting into the class, working with the equipment, learning how the equipment works, creating projects with equipment, and then learning how to enhance the story through the use of the technology. But then also, I think sometimes I even teach my more lecture-style classes as a production class. I teach a leadership class, and we're always doing leadership activities, and we're just doing lots of case studies and lots of different things. So I think the production side of me and being a hands-on class works no matter what topic I teach. I also teach public speaking. So that, students are getting in front of you and you're doing a couple of speeches in the semester,
Sure.
and you're
Yeah.
helping them become comfortable in front of an audience, and radio production, television production, leadership, writing, commercial and writing news, are all some theory classes, all these kinds of things. My colleagues and I, we teach a lot of different classes so that it's like a 3 or 4 year cycle to get through them to make sure students hit what they need.
Yeah, and then you kind of
Circle back
around.
again. Yeah, sometimes we teach the same classes, some we teach different, but you always need to be on top of your skills for whatever is coming that next semester.
Well, sure, and I imagine in that 3 year cycle, till you come back around to teaching that class, especially in the ever-changing space of podcasting and video production, whatever, things have changed fundamentally sometimes by the time you get back around to it.
Yeah, it's true. Social media. I mean, there's two ways to think about it. There's the kind of the enduring side, which is storytelling, which is going to skip through all of them. And then it's the button pushing. And I find it difficult. Sometimes students like to use the easiest technology to get it done, but I like them to try more difficult technologies so they go out into the industry knowing as much as they can about the topic area. I mean, you're paying to go to college. You should want to push yourself to get the most out of that time.
Yes. That's a lofty goal. I feel like sometimes.
Yeah, but it's an important one.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So speaking of production, you've produced a documentary. You're working on your second. Can you tell me about the first one?
Sure. My first documentary in recent years is called Raising Faith, Stories About Dyslexia. It really kind of unfolded from my experience as an educator and a mom, watching my daughter learn to read. And in that process of all of that unfolding, my husband had mentioned, and I knew that he was dyslexic as well. So he had some great strategies and help for her. And it just kind of unfolded into this is one of my favorite stories. It actually was a student teacher who said, I think maybe that your daughter might be dyslexic. So I just love that student teachers are learning those kinds of things and becoming reading specialists, because their take is just very, very open at that as a learner, an educational learner. And so I just wanted to learn about her experiences. So I interviewed her, interviewed my husband. We had developed a bit of a network and started asking some other people, and they and their families were interested in being interviewed. My daughter went through the Scottish Rite Dyslexia Center here in Lancaster. The Masonic Order's national charity is dyslexia.
No way.
So they have these dyslexic centers all over the country.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of them, and there's one here in Lancaster.
Okay.
And there was a wait of maybe a year or so. Put her name on the list. Meanwhile, back in her school, the teachers were kind of helping her, figure things out. And my husband was helping her, and so she did that. She did the Dyslexia Center for a couple of years and graduated from there. They have just a lovely graduation ceremony, and that was really helpful to her. And she graduated from Millersville in the entertainment technology program, and she had a lot of help, and she figured it out. And so my first film was just these stories about dyslexia, and I thought, we did not, as a family, we couldn't sit down and watch a visual resource that really told the story of how parents kind of grapple with the situation. And so I wanted to create something to provide that resource. And so I've shared it at different parent groups. Actually, in the fall, during my sabbatical, I'm going to Estonia, and I'm doing a festival showing at University of Tallinn in Estonia. Because people are trying to figure out dyslexia. It's a conundrum, and it's it's really knit into illiteracy worldwide, but very much here also in the United States. And so I finished that film in, I guess, 2020. I showed it a few times. It had a very successful film festival circuit. It was kind of cool during COVID because there was a lot of festival showings that were online. And so places I wouldn't have been able to go if they'd had it in the theater, I was able to be there and watch the film be shown. And that was really cool. We had a great experience at a festival in Waco, Texas, and a really nice talk back. Somebody facilitated it, and then some educators stayed behind and talked about the Texas state system. And Texas is one of those places where they're doing a lot of research on dyslexia in the prison system. And so that piqued my interest in that topic as well. But it's been a really great experience, and I feel like the goal to create a resource, I met that goal. I don't know where it's going to land. The preview or the trailer is on the Dyslexia Stories website, but I would like to put it somewhere permanently that people could access. That's not like Vimeo or YouTube. I'd like to put it on a platform of some sort. I don't know. So I'm working on that now, doing some research.
Okay.
It takes a lot to get a documentary onto a platform where people would have access to it.
Like outside of YouTube, you're saying?
Yeah, like like an app or something like that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so
like a distribution as opposed to just putting it up on. Not that that's not a problem, but I just don't think people will find it if it's even if I keyword it and do all kinds of things. I just don't know if it will be found there. But there's some documentary and some education websites that I'm looking into that might be able to host it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're saying something like, I don't know, PBS. I have young kids.
That would be amazing.
Okay. Yeah. If anyone's listening from PBS, Netflix.
There's all the places. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know PBS Kids because I have 2 young children. They have an app, so hop on the app and watch Daniel Tiger or something like that. That's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's so many requirements of those places. There's so many requirements. You have to shoot with this kind of a camera, and you have to have this kind of a quality, and when you go to just for instance, if you would go to say my goal is to put it on Netflix. Well, they have a lot of requirements. You have to meet all the requirements of the camera that's being used and all those kinds of things. I took a lot of that to heart when I did the first documentary, and because I wanted to know what it felt like to do all the steps for my students. I edited it. I shot it. I did the cinematography. I kind of did all the things, my pre-production. I did everything myself. I got help from a student who made a great soundscape and great music for the piece. And I had another student that did the starting graphic and the ending graphic. So I did work with 2 students. But other than that, I wanted to experience it all so that I could put myself in the seat of the student who, as a new producer, is learning all those things.
Sure.
And, outside of work, it took a couple of years, but it really has informed my pedagogy and how I teach a class now. And I learned from that what I'm really good at and what I like again, because it had been some time since I had produced things, because teaching is a full-time job, obviously. So this is extra. It's still towards my job, but it's outside of teaching classes and prepping and grading. And then also, I learned that I want someone else to be a cinematographer. So for my latest film, I've got some grant money from the state faculty fund, and I have hired a cinematographer because I knew that was a weakness the first time around. You just can't remember all the things. That's why production is a crew-based. It's a team effort. You need lots of people, because if everybody's thinking of their specific area, they're making sure that specific area is really good, whether you're on the mic or you're on lights or you're on camera. It's your one focus. Doing all the things, you're going to degrade what the overall process is and how things look, except that like I got a little bit of money, and so I spent it on the cinematographer, and I'm very pleased with that decision. And so I'm hoping that the visuals will be better than what I could have done myself.
Mm-hmm.
And there already are. Looking at the interviews I've already had, I'm like, wow, this
Yeah.
looks so good. I'm like,
Yeah, it's tough when you're in a position to be a jack of all trades, master
sure.
of
I mean,
none.
it's a money issue, right? The bigger your budget, the more people you can hire to do all the things.
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak from a nonprofit perspective on that, but yeah, it's to wear multiple hats. You always feel like there's
Juggling.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's more to learn about everything and no time to learn it, and so you just do it to the best of your abilities, and then you move on.
And then you have a podcast studio.
Right.
It's lovely, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, speaking of a team effort, this space
Oh, I
and
bet.
everything we have here is.
And you got grant money, like
It's
media
yep.
production. That's the way it's going these days. If you're a nonprofit, you
Yeah.
ask everybody. You put money in a hat, and then you have enough to build it.
Yeah, and so far it's been going very well. But you mentioned your next project, and I think it ties into what you learned about in Texas with the prison pipeline and everything. So tell me about what the focus of your current project is.
Every now and then, when you're working on one project, something starts to needle you about something you've learned. And that's what it was for me when I learned that I guess it's close to, and people can do searches and get the exact statistics. 47, like 80% of inmates in our prison system federally, 80% have some type of learning difference, disability, those kinds of things. And about 47% of those people are in some way identified as dyslexic. When researchers have gone in, and in Texas, they went in and they did a lot of studies of inmates, and they found out that, of course, illiteracy is high. Illiteracy is high.
Yeah.
And in the prison system, but it starts at elementary school. It starts when you're in, I think now at like 5.5, there are different tests that young kids can take to maybe identify dyslexia that isn't happening. And then I kind of followed this little thread and pulled it a little more and learned about the school to prison pipeline, or what they call the trauma to prison pipeline, where you avoid school because it's hard, because you can't read. And reading is one of those things that they're touted. Oh, my child read at 3, or my child read very early on. And then there's shame and avoidance and worry and absence, trying to work through the issues. One young person I talked with, they said that they realized something was different about them when they were taking like a achievement test, which, most schools have them now. And they were like, I was only half done and everybody else was getting up to leave, and then you start to realize people are different, and you're struggling in this area. And a lot of times it's young people try to avoid it. And sometimes that turns into some behavioral issues. And then they're spending time in a behavioral situation or in the principal's office or wherever kids go, and they're acting out. And if it's because of dyslexia, they're just trying to avoid doing that thing that people are going to make them do. If it's reading aloud, if it's working in a group, that you're struggling in this area. Now, dyslexia kids are often extremely gifted and smart kids, so they find ways around it. They develop their vocal skills. They're very good at talking to people, and they're very good at I almost think of it as like sleight of hand tricks. Don't look over here and make me read. I'm going to spin you this great tale, this great story. And, our time's up, and I didn't have to do the thing, those kinds of things. But attention disruptions, a lot of times this is not it's avoidance of trying to read and the shame. And then this is like kicking the can down the road. And you get to that, was it fourth grade or something? They call it you move from learning to read to reading to learn. And then you get in sixth grade and the books are thicker and you're still struggling with those basic, phonetics or understanding or comprehension. And thankfully, there's a lot of technology that we have today, like, books on, I was going to say books on tape, but now it's just like digital books, right?
What is a
yeah.
tape? You mean like
exactly.
Scotch tape?
When when my daughter was little, we used to go to the library and we used to get a book and a cassette tape of the book and listen to it while we rode to keep them busy, like on road trips and things like that. But Audible and all of those kinds of great opportunities. I know students at Millersville, if there's a textbook that they don't have access to for an audiobook, that they can get some of those resources. So dyslexic kids have to find a way that they learn best, and they have to, learn that way. What I find fascinating is that if you have 100 kids and 20, since it's about 20%, are dyslexic, if everybody was taught the way dyslexic learns, everybody would still learn. So the dyslexic way of learning would be helpful to everyone, and everyone would learn that way. But the way a lot of times in a lot of schools, not all the schools all the time, because some people are doing the great work, and I would never want to thwart anybody's efforts in this area. Shout out to everybody who's really working on this. I almost got tears in my eyes the other day. I saw a colleague. She went through the dyslexic training program, and she's a professor at Millersville in their education department. I was like, that is just so great that our educators at Millersville are learning this, because there's a certain way, like the learning sticks in kids who have dyslexia a different way. They learn a different way. Like they might need tactile way, or they might need like repetition and more work and practicing over and over again. Hurts your eyes, it makes you tired, it makes you frustrated. And so a lot of times in our educational system, you just have to keep doing it over and over again, and that doesn't work with dyslexia. That's not going to make it stick if it's a certain way of learning. So that's, yeah. So, I mean, really our 5 and 6 year olds need to learn to read in whatever way we can meet them at that place. And that's time, money, resources to have those. And it's starting, I guess they call it like science of reading or reading science. I can't quite remember, but it's a science-based way of the way the brain works. And that is working really well. My daughter used the Orton-Gillingham program, but there's Wilson and Davis. I mean, there's lots of different programs out there. There's tests. There's the Wechsler test was I think created in like the 1920s, and that helps understand reading comprehension. And it's grown and changed, and it's like an intelligence test, but it's not the only one. And it shows how your brain learns things and how you access different ideas and what direction you think through problem solving and can come to some conclusions. And a lot of times dyslexic folks are better at this one section than a lot of other people, which and maybe have a more difficulty in another part, and that kind of shows, there's issues. But it's also hereditary. But a lot of times, because there's shame involved with not being able to read and illiteracy, and that just gets deeper as you get older. You might not say, my dad, your parents might not say, well, I had trouble reading, or aunt so-and-so or uncle so-and-so struggled with reading, because a lot of times people hide that, and then that just makes it more difficult the older you get to negotiate it.
It is occurring to me as you're telling me all this that if people with dyslexia are really adept at finding ways to learn and finding ways to sort of circumnavigate the roadblocks that they face, they could get past that like 5-6-year-old mark. They could be well into middle school, say, even high school, without anyone batting an eye at their progress, their academic progress. And so they could be sitting there as a 15-year-old without fully having recognized that they could get help. Like if they, there's some shame built into it because they've already recognized that they are different than quote everyone else. And that sort of stigma, even if it's only internal, like no one else knows, let's say, but that stigma, I'm sure, sticks with them internally. And so I could imagine it's sort of a chicken or the egg scenario when it comes to then making that jump into the criminal justice system. With that, like any increase or any, change in our mass incarceration in the United States is always going to disproportionately affect people with learning disabilities, people in poverty, racial minorities, like especially when you sit at the confluence of those three things. And if you didn't get help in school, you're definitely not going to get help in the prison system.
Literacy is an equity. It's an equity issue. It's, the teachers there might not know kind of dyslexic ways of teaching. And so your parents, and it's expensive if, like the Mason Center is free, you're on a waiting list. But if you get a tutor, that's going to cost money because the tutors in our educational systems, by and large, not all of them, but by and large, don't have the understanding of the ways to teach for dyslexic kids.
Sure.
And often that's individually, so that takes resources. So they're getting passed by because their parents can't afford to have a tutor. So you can't learn to read in elementary school, and your family can't afford a tutor, so you just don't learn to read. Like, is that where we're headed? I think that's, yeah. And so the film is called Dyslexia Behind Bars. That's my working title right now. But the more I learn about it, I realize that it's the issue of early elementary school. And we could talk all day about the reasons why that this isn't happening. But the result is there's a lot of people that are illiterate in America, and that's pretty crazy to me, right? Yeah. Like it's like I feel like, wow, like that shouldn't happen. That should that shouldn't happen.
Such a sad truth.
And so that's like really frustrating to me. What they found is people would say, our family just isn't good readers. So you're like, okay, I'm going to suck it up and just do my life because that's just my family's, road to hall. Reading out loud can be terrifying, and a lot of times in educational circles, everybody takes their turn to read. Some kids I've talked with in the past talked about how they would volunteer for short lines, so they knew that it was, this is the second half of the paragraph. There's only 4 sentences. I'll raise my hand to do this one. Homework fatigue, writing assignments take longer, practice assignments take longer, and the trauma results in fear, stress, anxiety, worry, avoidance, attention disruptions, physical symptoms, catastrophic thoughts, and hopelessness. Because we're based on a literate society, and you can't access that with the way the system is creating reading right now. And let me just back up a minute and say that I'm a mom and I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a, and even though I have my PhD in education, I'm not a dyslexia specialist.
Sure.
And I'm not an educator that teaches students in a class, like young people in the classroom, how to be educators. So I'm coming at this from an advocacy perspective. But I did, I have talked with a lot of dyslexia specialists through the years, and I think that kind of got stuck in my brain. And so I don't, we can decide here and there where things are falling down in the system, but it just seems like if there's a way to access the money that's going to incarceration and teach kids to read in elementary school. I just heard just read and heard the statistic that there's a county in Delaware, at least one county in Delaware, that 0% of the kids in that county school district are reading at grade level. 0% at grade. Not that they're not reading, but they're not reading at grade level. No one is reading at grade level. And I can't remember the statistic. A decent number of them weren't reading well.
Sure.
And so this is a problem. I mean, when you're and to back up a minute, something else you said earlier, when you're somebody I interviewed for the documentary this spring, because I started some professional interviews, said that when you're incarcerated, you get a book of the manual of all the rules, and if you can't read that manual, you don't know if you don't know what is optional and required. You can't get a GED. You can't use the library. You don't want to tell anyone.
Yeah.
You can't have access to things like, and there is some inroads that are happening in the prison systems now with, I think it's inmates teaching inmates to read. Like there's some programs out there that are helpful, and the First Steps Act is trying.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the First Steps Act was signed into law 2018. And that, can you talk a little bit about what at least the goal?
Sure.
It was a bipartisan act that was passed and signed, like I said, 2018. What was the goal that lawmakers wanted to accomplish with that?
I feel like this is a test. No,
well, do you know, like from a dyslexia learning disability perspective, what were they trying to accomplish there?
I mean, there's lots, like every act that's passed, there's lots of things put into it. The one that was specifically interesting to me is that there's been no learning intake exams. So when you're incarcerated, nobody checks to see if you can read what your educational level is. And so you enter in, like they'll check other areas. There's a physical exam, there's other things, but they could learn to read while incarcerated if that was even checked. So one of the things about this act was, as part of the intake into, this was the federal system, First Access federal system, that they would know going in that you struggled with reading. And that has never been checked before 2018 on a required basis or on a suggested basis or whatever. I mean, and I get it. There's a million things that you need to be concerned about when someone's incarcerated. Sure. But recidivism and what your life looks like when you come out of that institution, and your ability to get a job and work with a parole officer and keep a job and contribute again in society is really partially founded on being literate. And if that's something that no one was paying attention to before, if that's one of the areas of the First Steps Act that can actually happen, and of course, that means everybody that goes in has to have tests. It's a resource issue. Right. But that's again, if we help 5 and 6 year olds learn to read, how many, and this might be my rose-colored glasses, how many fewer would be incarcerated?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure it's impossible to study that, but it's such a intuitive snowballing effect, or it intuitively makes sense to me that if you can't read at a young age and the problem is never addressed, right? Even if you somehow avoid the criminal justice system, what are your prospects in life as far as career advancement and networking and all of that?
And people might think, well, isn't there specialists? I know people in elementary school that they help out, but and reading specialists, but they're often not trained in the kind of remediation for dyslexia. And also the IEP, which a lot of people have to help their classroom experience, doesn't name dyslexia. It's like an undiagnosed learning issue. They don't name dyslexia. And dyslexia, has a certain way that you can learn, and then I wouldn't say the word is not you're better. I wouldn't want to say that. You're still always going to be a struggle, but you've
Yeah.
learned to harness the parts of your brain that allow you to understand to read. I mean, you look on that page, you have strategies to work through that process, and the brain is stuck. I remember seeing kids like it's becomes part of your body. So instead of learning sight words like kids might read in elementary school, that a lot of people just pick up on their own, because we learn to listen before we can speak, because you know, as babies, we're listening a lot longer before we can actually speak words. So a lot of times language just tumbles out into reading, and it's a very organic process for more than half, potentially, of little kids that are learning to read. But the other half, like, they need to trace the letters on sand, so it goes into the other side of their brain, and they need to look at the letters. Like I've heard some kids say some letters are bigger and some are smaller, and just following the letter and then the space and the letter and the space is difficult. So how do you help them achieve that goal? I know some people who are dyslexic. And they probably never will. And it's not really important to be able to say your alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but that becomes like something that in early elementary school that everybody focuses. Oh, can you sing your alphabet? Can you say your alphabet? So from a 3-year-old who's struggling with that, even which direction they read a book, is it backwards? Is it upside down? A lot of little kids memorize the book, and then it looks like they're reading, like they know that concept.
But so the fix could be the fix.
Yeah, I hate to use that terminology because they're not kids to be fixed.
Right.
I guess, there's strategies that help dyslexics learn to read, to become as efficient reader as anybody else out there, or at least able to harness that literacy.
It's so sad to me that a strategy could be as simple as like tracing letters with your finger, and it isn't being addressed by and large.
It's a learning difference. I guess I like the word difference. You learn differently. It's not like, oh, you need to be fixed, so you learn this other way. It's not about that. It's you learn in a different way than other people. So let's address that when you're a little kid. Let's find out, does anybody in your family struggle with reading? That could give us a cue that maybe we need to find some additional strategies to help you in the classroom.
Yeah.
To be able to take that difference that you have, that also may have some really great benefits that other people don't see. I know my husband and daughter really are three-dimensional. They can three-dimensionally figure things out, and they see it in their brain, and they turn it around, and like there's a process in there that's way beyond me. Like I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But they think a certain way that I really think. And having known other dyslexic, there's some really interesting inventors, really interesting people that have furthered the world because of their dyslexic intellect. So giving them the ability to read in elementary school is a huge benefit to the world.
Right. Yeah. So
now where do we go from here?
Right.
Darren?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking if somebody who is dyslexic gets access to those strategies to learn how to read and navigate life early on, and they have gone on to change the world for the better, how much potential are we losing out on by not screening people who are going into our criminal justice system to help sort of course correct, give them those strategies. I'm gonna pull my notes out here. I was reading for the First Steps Act. I read this, and I thought this just really bolsters your case to be made here for your documentary. Indigenous Americans and Black Americans report the highest prevalence of disability in the general population in America. But white people were the most frequent group to report disability in the jail and prison populations. So to me, that says that disability is like the driving force behind incarceration above anything else. And so addressing, making it known, I think like a documentary on this topic is so important to just draw awareness to it. Because I don't think anybody, if you ask people like what's the one cause of incarceration, somebody might say poverty, somebody might say racial injustice, it might be some other answers, but I don't think very many people are going to be like, oh yeah, disabilities, and yet
illiteracy and dyslexia
yeah.
among them, yeah, and it has something to do with the behavioral issues. A young man I interviewed for my first documentary said I just didn't like to read, so I, would try to do other things. And then that's read as a behavioral. The avoidance and the behavioral issues are because you're trying to get out of doing something that is very difficult for you. In an environment where everyone else seems to be doing okay. Maybe there's 2 in a classroom. If there's 25 kids in the class, maybe 2 are struggling,
Right.
And little kids aren't very forthcoming with, yeah, was that a hard assignment? Yeah, that was it. They're easy to say when they got the A's.
Right. Yeah. Well,
but
and I mean that just builds this load of stigma. Like and it would, I imagine, lead many of them to feel like it's them versus the system. And if you get through school having this perspective of it's me versus the system, if the system transitions from teachers to police officers, that, I could see that being sort of the crux of lots of interactions with law enforcement going south is you've been marginalized your whole academic experience.
yeah, I'm always struck by the resilience of the way young kids find ways around the issue. They find other things they're good at. They'll do, instead of writing a little paper, they'll do a diorama or the most beautiful poster you ever saw, because it didn't involve like doing a lot of reading to get through the artistic side and figuring things out. And I think one of the issues I'm facing now is that I've heard from some experts from my Dyslexia Behind Bars film, but I really want to hear the voices of people who have been incarcerated who struggle with reading and what that was like. Like I really think to portray and to share an authentic film documentary, I need people to tell me what it was like for them to be in elementary school and to feel this and how it might have led in some way or another to incarceration. And while they were incarcerated, did they learn to read? What was this experience like? Or did they just get by and did they come out and where are they now? Like that's my film is going to be inauthentic. Like I won't finish it if I don't have some voices of people who have gone through this experience, because I think this is what people need to hear. I think lawmakers and people involved in funding for education and who decides what is on the state exams and where the money goes for all the things need to know that more money needs to go to elementary schools to teach kids reading at wherever they're at. Wherever you're at, you should be able to learn to read in elementary school. There should be somebody there to help you to learn to be literate for society.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in the 40s and 50s and 60s. I remember my grandmother telling me that all her sons graduated from high school, and that was a big deal for her. That's what she wanted. She wanted them to be able to read. She wanted them to graduate. Like that was like and so I think we need to kind of bring some of that that back and say, you learn to read in elementary school. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think it matters if you're not reading on level. It just means that you can read, some things you need for life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. The goal shouldn't be to graduate on time. The goal should be to build a human being that feels comfortable going out into society and being a productive member of it.
And it takes persistence, and it takes encouragement and early intervention, and it takes an individualized approach for each kid, and that is a difficult thing when our elementary schools are overcrowded in some places, and the neediest places are sometimes the least funded schools, probably definitely are the least funded schools. But even well-funded schools aren't really using science-based reading approaches. I mean, what school district, I mean, it's difficult to think we have to train everybody all over again because, of course, there's always the next new thing in education because we're desperately trying to do better at our jobs. I mean, I think the reason why professional development is so important in education is you want to do your job better. And then here's this new way of doing things that I think a lot of young educators are learning at some level. That everybody that's teaching elementary school, again, I get the complexity in all of this, but the bottom line is we have kids in elementary school who aren't learning to read.
Right. Yeah.
And that's resulting in bigger societal issues that shouldn't have to be there.
Yes. Yes. No, that is such an important point to make. If they're not learning to read, not only is that creating issues down the road, but like that is a population that can't read is a national security risk, is a economic.
It's a darn shame.
Right. Yeah, it's a darn shame.
I mean, it's like, and if you have other social issues, depending on your home life situation, your school life situation, where you're living, who you're living with, and all of those other things, food insecurity, home insecurity, all of those other things, and reading is another thing on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. If you have food to worry about, reading.
Like educational system can't help with a lot of things, right?
Right.
They just can't.
Right.
But they can do this one thing.
Right.
And I think just about, every educator I would talk to would be like, heck yeah, we want this too. Right. Why can't we make this happen?
Right.
Like, I don't, unfortunately, have the answer to that. That's one of the reasons why, I couldn't just do one documentary. I had to do a second one because I'm like, I have to figure out, I have to create something that maybe some people could see that maybe could make a difference.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's such a good point. Like if we haven't figured it out in our school system yet, we're definitely not going to figure it out in our criminal justice system. But the sooner we can figure out the first, we'll figure out the latter. I think that's a very important call to action for anyone watching. If you know anyone who has struggled reading, if you yourself have struggled reading, struggled learning how to read, and or are dyslexic, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. You can contact Benchmark at Benchmark Strong. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. TikTok, it's at bench.mark.studio. You can email us. You can email me directly, Darren Landis at benchmarkprogram.org, and we'll connect you. We'd love to funnel you to Stacey to raise awareness for this and try to figure out ways to create an empathetic response and create progress in our community and in our country. Stacey, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, my Millersville email is stacy.irwin@millersville.edu. You could probably just Google Stacey Irwin, Millersville, and it'll come up. So that's probably the best way, or through you. And also, know that if you're asking around and you're asking people, that it might not be something they're very forthcoming with, and, to take it easy. It's hard to say. until I started this documentary, I did not realize, as a privileged person who went through lots of education, I did not know that there was so much shame, I think, in saying that you can't read. So, there's people always say, oh, there's so many resources for literacy in the state of Pennsylvania. There's so many resources. Yeah, there are resources, but, it's tough when you have to read them all. You got to get in there and read the resources. I think that's one of the reasons why also I did a documentary. I remember someone telling me dyslexic families don't want another thing to read as they're trying to negotiate the experience because it could be hereditary. And I don't know all the answers. I don't know many of the answers for sure. I just want to create something that it's an experience. People can look at it and it's experience to go, that's something I did not know before. That's something that is worth changing about our world. It's worth increasing literacy. It's just it's worth it. And I think dyslexia work at the elementary school level with kids who are struggling is potentially an easier way than other ways that we're experiencing as they grow.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to change it while they're young, while there's more resources and whatever, as opposed to once the snowball has gotten bigger.
Right, and it's not yes, there's so many strengths that we all have, and everybody's different. Yes. So to teach reading one specific way when everybody's different is tough. That's we can recognize that. It's very easy to recognize that everybody's very different. They bring their strengths to the table. So if we can take this one area and build it as an additional strength, it's going to make things better for everyone.
So that strikes me as a sort of a conundrum. In your experience so far, if there's such a level of hesitancy to talk about a personal experience with dyslexia because of the shame and whatever else, if nobody wants to, I shouldn't put it like that. If people are hesitant to speak about it, how do we get people to listen? Like the lawmakers, the administrators, the people who funnel money in our country, federal, state, local. How do we get them to listen if there's that hesitancy from people who have lived experience?
Well, I think we start with the little kids. We start with the 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds that are struggling in school, and we help them. And then in that process of increasing our literacy rates, that's going to help future generations. Mm-hmm. And then we try to, where possible, remove stigmas. Where can somebody who's 27 become a better reader? Like I couldn't even tell you. Like where, you could even have gone through college. You could have gotten out of high school, but you're like, man, I'd love to learn to read a little more. I don't even know where one would go. So I think just making the whole issue of dyslexia well known and the resources available, and to talk about it. We need to talk about it. It needs to become something that we talk about it. And again, I'm just a cog in the wheel of trying to figure this all out, right? Like I'm just somebody who's like, I'm a college professor and I like to do documentaries and I want to do something about this issue. And so I'm probably, perhaps said the wrong thing somewhere in the podcast, and I acknowledge that. I'm a learner just like everyone else.
I did as well.
And I know somebody can say, because I've had this say to me, somebody say, well, it's easy for you to say, you are already a reader. You went through, but I do remember as an elementary school kid very acutely knowing that I was in this reading group and I got moved or bumped to a different reading group in first or second grade. And I remember that some of my friends were bumped to another group that were reading thicker books. They were reading like chapter books. So I knew in first or second grade, me personally, that there was a hierarchy for reading. at a very young age. And so I can imagine, like, it's something that's stuck in my brain. I can imagine that lots of little kids are feeling that. And it's difficult to, you don't have the words at that young age. But there are so many, literacy and dyslexia groups have come up with so many strategies and so many programs and so many ways to help kids now, more than ever. I mean, there's 75 years of dyslexia research out there. There's lots of ways. So it's more almost maybe connecting the dots. We have to help. We have to make it something that, you struggled in this area. Let's work on that. Let's find a resource for you. Let's do this thing. Or you're in first grade and you've noticed some things like that student teacher noticed about my daughter, and you're like, I think this might be and there are things like this Wechsler test. I can't remember what the official name of it is. It tests in those areas to figure out strengths and some weaknesses. So even there, if somebody is, dyslexia is on a contingency. Some are more dyslexic or less dyslexic. But even if you have ADHD or ADD and you're struggling a little bit, then you're dyslexic. Like, already you want to avoid school. And now there's this added layer.
Sure.
If you're hungry and you are struggling with reading, there's an added layer. You just want to get out of there.
Right.
My husband talks about he was kept in during recess in order to study reading. Oh, until a parent and his mom jumped in. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, but like educators, they're trying to find the space in the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
but from a kid's
I understand. And this wasn't the 20s, this was younger, but it's possible that things like that, still happen. And I don't think the IU program specifically deals with dyslexia tools.
Yeah. Wow. But the tools are out there. The stories are out there. The money is out there. Like you said, we just have to connect all the dots. I really hope your documentary can be one of the cogs to connect those dots.
I appreciate that.
Hopefully.
I appreciate being able to come and talk about it with you.
Yeah, well, it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much.